Hello, and welcome to the Physical Therapy Owners Club podcast. I'm Nathan Shields, and today I have one of my good friends, mentors, colleagues, someone I really look up to, a visionary himself, Dr. Dimitrios Kostopoulos. Dimi, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Dr. Dimitrios Kostopoulos is chairman of the board of Hands-On Diagnostics and co-founder of Hands-On Companies. If you've listened to him, I think we've been on this, 2 or 3 times, Dimi, that we've had you on. You shared your story initially in one of the first couple of episodes. And if any of those listening haven't heard my conversations with Dimi, I'd appreciate it. He's got a great story. He comes from Greece, as you can tell by his accent, and currently lives between New York and Clearwater, Florida. So he's now becoming a snowbird, like many of us would love to do. One of the things I wanted to bring him on for especially is because we had a hands-on diagnostics conference that was successful, Leadership Academy in Clearwater Beach just a month or so ago, and this is June of 2022. And Dimi has his hands, you have your hands in a lot of things that are going on the national level, with the APTA, of course, with diagnostics, but also with efforts across New York and the nation in terms of the profession. So based on some of your presentation, I was excited to have you on because you have an overview, a perspective of what's happening in the profession. And so wanted to talk with you about that today, about some of the things you brought up in the presentation itself just a few weeks ago, and see what we can do as a profession, or where we're headed as a profession going forward. Is that cool? We talked about that, Dimi?
Sure. And let me start, Nathan, by saying how much I appreciate, as a physical therapist, as a member of this profession, as a member of our various advocacy organizations, and as a private practitioner, about all of the great work that you are doing, and for providing information, new ideas, and disseminating to the physical therapy community about how we can have a worthier profession, not worthier from the point of view of what we offer, but worthier profession from the point of view of what we receive for what we offer.
Or value. Yeah, I mean,
value.
It doesn't match.
Absolutely, it doesn't. And unfortunately, the indicators that we have in front of us, especially economic indicators, show that this mismatch between the very valuable work that physical therapists offer compared to what they receive back, there is a great discrepancy there. But you asked the question, okay, where we are heading as a profession, right? So the first thing we have to examine really is where are we heading economically as a US economical system, as well as a worldwide economical system. Those of you who follow data on the economy, I am certain that you have heard of Ray Dalio, and he's a very, very famous world economist.
JP Morgan Chase, right? Isn't he CEO?
That's right.
JP Morgan Chase.
And for years, yes. Yeah. And now he has, of course, the Ray Dalio company and the Ray Dalio all-weather portfolios. But I want to describe to you what he is talking about as a economic cycle, because I'm going to make a point as how that will translate to some degree, having a prediction about the future of the physical therapy profession, right? Mm-hmm. And For those of you who can watch this on YouTube, I encourage that, because I'm showing right now an actual slide from that describes the economic cycles of Ray Dalio, but I will describe that. He's talking about essentially that when you have a big change in the world, you have a new world order, and then there is a period of time where there is peace, prosperity, and a productive debt growth. Then, as that continues, people get kind of more and more greedy. They want to make more. They want to consume a lot more.
Yeah.
And sometimes we want to consume a lot more than what we produce.
Sure.
So we have a debt bubble and a very big wealth gap where the rich become richer, the poor become poorer. And then there is a debt burst and an economic downturn. So what the government does, we have inflation, right? So the government starts printing money and the inflation becomes greater and greater. Sometimes we have revolutions and wars, political restructuring, and then we're ready for a new world order. So here is the interesting thing. According to Ray Dalio, right now, we are somewhere in the area of printing money and revolutions and wars. And how do we see that? We see that because with COVID, the whole period of time from 2020 until now, you know how much money were given around the world, and especially here in the United States. Right. PPP money, SBA loans with low interest, lots of stuff like that, 0% interest. So Trillions. There was a lot of, exactly. So there was a lot of credit and a lot of money given out there without necessarily having production. So if you don't have production, if you don't have enough products in the marketplace, so the things that exist in the marketplace cost now more, all right? So if they cost more, we have inflation. Right. But the question is, do we have inflation within the physical therapy profession also? Do we? Well, we have for the for the costs, exactly, but not for the revenue. Right. We have a one-sided inflation on the money we spend because the rents are higher and products, equipment is more expensive.
Salaries are crazy.
Supplies, salaries are crazy.
Right.
And on the other side, you know, what you got yesterday from the insurance companies, it's the same amount you're receiving today. And in some cases, as you all know, even less than that. There is this distortion there.
Yeah, that you know, it really hit me hard because I was talking to a client that I coach in Virginia, and I didn't think about it, but he said, you know, that $65 United Healthcare flat rate payment that I get now is the same flat rate payment that I received 20 years ago with my United Healthcare contract. That $65 doesn't get you as far anymore, and it definitely doesn't cover the cost of expenses.
Exactly. That is absolutely correct. And although thinking about the future, although we do not have magic powers to see into the future, we can make assumptions about certain things in terms of what will happen in the physical therapy profession. And there are some data actually, Nathan, that I would like to share with your audience today. Please. And this is data that we have. Lots of this data comes from the private practice section of the APTA, and some of you may be aware of this data. But let's look first of all, on the GDP, the gross domestic product of the United States, that was contracted by 1.4% in the first quarter of 2022, while inflation jumped to 8.5%. Now, all right, so that's fine. We have a contraction of the GDP, but what happens? Are we on the road of producing more so that we can balance out that contraction and decrease inflation because there would be more products in the marketplace? Well, if we look that the healthcare costs in the United States are growing by 1.1% faster than the annual GDP, then that is not so encouraging for where things are going.
Right.
So, and I'm going to show you some more data here. According to data from the private practice section, and you can see the median revenue and the costs by physical therapists and physical therapy assistants. So I'm gonna read the figure, right?
Okay.
In 2019, and my apologies if those of you who are seeing it, you cannot see it very well, but I'm going to make it a little bigger for you.
Yeah, it's not
so
bad.
in 2019, the production per physical therapist equivalent, full-time equivalent, was $201,000. Okay,
per year,
and per year, and the cost was $168,000 a year. Now you're going to tell me, I don't pay my staff $168,000. No. You don't pay your physical therapist $168,000 a year, but you have billing department, rents, you have support personnel, you have front desk, you have all of these other expenses.
right?
So the cost per full-time equivalent therapist production was $168,000, and the revenue was $201,000. Now, in 2021, the revenue dropped by $201,000 to $194,000. But you know what happens to the expense? It increased from $168,000 to $171,000. So the difference between your expense and your income is what makes up your profit. So if you have lower income, lower revenue from your physical therapist and an increased expense for the physical therapy services, then what happens to your profit? Your profit goes down. So we have then around the country, again, data from PPS-APTA, from the peer-to-peer group, profit margins going somewhere between 8 to 12% across the nation.
I can't wait to see the 2022 data, because the salaries that we're hearing and whatnot are going up, and reimbursements might be similar, but between 2019 and 2021, that's a $9,000 difference in profit between the production and the costs. Almost 20 to 25% drop in profit right there per year. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't see it necessarily getting better.
Yeah, yes, I don't believe it will get better, but there are things we can do, right? Sure. There are things we can do, but here is, if we do nothing right now, if we continue, right, which is not really an option, but if we do nothing and taking into account historically, what has happened, especially with the federal government and the reimbursement from CMS, the Centers for Medicare Services, I believe that we are moving towards a 3-tier flat rate from Medicare. I'm not talking about right now. I'm talking in 3 to 5 years from now, okay? Now, I want you to think of this. In 2020, we started flagging the initial evaluation patients under Medicare, under the new codes, right? You no longer have the original initial evaluation code that we were using. Now you have 3 tiers of codes. You have the, lesser complexity, minimal complexity, moderate and severe complexity, high complexity. Okay. Now, despite that, we get paid exactly the same rate, no matter how you categorize those patients, right? But why do we do that? How that can be useful to Medicare without, aside from just data collection. So it is assumed that if you have a lower complexity patient, you spend less time with them compared to a higher complexity patient. So what I believe will happen eventually is that Medicare will implement in 3 to 5 years from now 3 different flat rates representing the low, moderate, and high complexity cases.
Okay.
And I believe that those rates will be somewhere between $75, $85, and $95 based on complexity, regardless how long that patient stays in your practice and what you do to that patient. And guess what? If you are a private practitioner, right now, since 2020, Medicare has data what percentage of your patients are low, moderate, and high complexity. So if in the future, when there is a price differential, you start flagging everybody as high complexity, then you're going to get audited.
They already got your data. All of a sudden, your high complexity patients went from 20% of your patient population to now 60 or 70% of your population. That's an issue.
Yeah. And we have to remember that what Medicare does matter.
Right.
And it matters because the reimbursement rates from different insurance carriers, they are being determined based on Medicare rates and regional workers' compensation rates. This is what they use as benchmarks.
That's right.
To decide what they pay you.
Is that something that concerns you? You bring it up based on what we've done here in the past couple of years as far as assigning complexity to new patients, and you're projecting, and because I know you have some ins in some of these circles, projecting the tiered flat rate system. Is that a concern for you? How do you feel about that?
Well, it is a concern from the point of view that a flat rate system does not truly represent the effort that the therapist may need to put on an individual case, on an individual patient. It kind of puts everybody in the same, almost in the same category. I've always been against flat rates. It is a flat rate system, I would say, is against a free market.
I get it.
It takes away opportunities.
Well, And me having not practiced for some time, and so I'm a little bit naive and ignorant in this regard. But if a high complexity patient, for example, is someone who has a significant number of comorbidities, does that equate to a high complexity patient, even though they just came in with a arthroscopic knee post-op, right? The care would be the same, but the comorbidities are maybe a laundry list.
Well, that remains to be seen, because we don't know what would be the actual criteria at the end of the day,
right?
On how they will define that. Now there are some basic criteria, but I don't know if the criteria will be the same or they will be changing.
Understood.
But look, here is the thing, right? Any profession the viability of a profession, the viability of any profession, including the physical therapy profession, depends on the value it projects, the perceived value of the people in society, and then the efforts and achievements that that profession makes at a legislative level, because sometimes you may be offering great value, but you may have legislative and political stumbles that do not allow you to, barriers that do not allow you to expand and do the things that you want to do as a profession. So look, there are practical things that can be done. The first thing is that we have to significantly expand as a profession our positioning within the spectrum of healthcare professions. Direct access was a major win across the nation. But remember, we do not have direct access with Medicare. We have direct access with the other insurances, but we don't have direct access with Medicare. And still, for Medicare patients, you need to obtain a signed plan of care or prescription. So an initial win in that direction would be the recognition of direct access for physical therapy within the Medicare system.
Without the signed plan of care, without the need for follow-up visits every 10 or 30, 90 days, whatever.
Correct. And that, we must not stop there. That will be the stepping stone to reach eventually recognition of the physical therapist as a primary care provider for neuromusculoskeletal problems, which means essentially physician recognition within the Medicare system. The same way that a chiropractor is a chiropractic physician, the podiatrist is a podiatric physician. The same way a physical therapist has to be a physical therapist physician. Okay.
Do you find that the APTA is really focused and pushing for that at this point? Because as we were talking before I pushed record, I didn't know that there is a primary care special interest group in the APTA, and I don't think you knew that either. Obviously, it's not getting a lot of promotion, but I think that's where this would start on a grassroots level is focus on physical therapists becoming primary care physicians in that scope. Do you see the APTA doing that?
I believe that the APTA eventually will get to that in a more active capacity. However, there is a progression of things. There is a gradient of things that pragmatically can be achieved.
Right.
So Right now, I believe that efforts are being done in short-term efforts are being done in areas that have to do with reimbursement, the recognition of the PTAs,
Right.
managing to cancel the 15% reduction for
Right.
treatment by PTAs,
Yeah.
and a series of other things before we get to something bigger like that.
Yeah, especially with the cuts and proposed cuts every year that we have to fight when it comes to Medicare, and the obvious reduction in pay that we got with the PTAs, and fight for telehealth over the past couple of years and where that stands. I can see that not necessarily as a distraction per se for this, because we want them to fighting on those things, but from a long-term view, I can definitely see where that recognition of us as primary care physicians in the neuromusculoskeletal realm would pay huge dividends. And we're talking about not just increased reimbursement, but for a boots on the ground perspective, no longer, hopefully, we would no longer be considered specialists by insurance companies, and patients have to pay the specialist copay, but rather they pay the physician copay, which would allow for a huge influx of patients to get more physical therapy care.
Sure, absolutely. That will definitely be a major win, recognizing the physical therapist as a primary care provider for patients' neuromusculoskeletal problems, and have them having to pay only the primary care copay rather than the specialist copay. And at the same time, as physical therapists, we have to consider that it is totally unacceptable to be running a private practice business, a physical therapy private practice, with a 10 to 12% profit margin.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable, and it is dangerous.
Right.
Because the moment you get the threat of Medicare or any other large insurance telling you that they are going to cut reimbursement by 15% or whatever, that automatically becomes a major threat for the viability of private practice physical therapy. Okay. So then what is the solution, right? So physical therapists must look for ways to expand their revenue basis. How can they do that? I would say that there are two major platforms. There are things that they can do in their practice that are not paid by insurance, but they have to collect cash from the patient. And there are things that they can do that will get paid by insurance, and it is above and beyond just plain old physical therapy.
Right.
So what are these things? When it comes to cash-based systems, there is a variety of things that therapists can do. I'm going to mention a few. Bringing in, for example, laser treatments, bringing in shockwave treatments, bringing in massage therapy, or product.
The newbie by NewFit.
Bringing the newbie, absolutely. Bringing the newbie by NewFit. Bringing insoles. Bringing vitamin products, even white labeling of vitamin products, selling gym equipment, doing exercise programs.
Yeah, I've got a friend in, I'm sorry to cut you out.
Yeah.
I've got a friend, and I've had one who is from, I think, Illinois or Indiana, and one in Rhode Island, that they have taken in that StretchPlex concept. If you've seen this StretchPlex, or no, I'm sorry, Stretch Labs. Stretch Labs franchise pop up around the country. They said, well, why can't we do that? And so they have their own version of the Stretch Labs, and they have plenty of patients that come and pay cash to get stretched and modalities, and without the oversight of the PT.
Absolutely. And these are all wonderful things. And if you want, in a future episode, I have even done research across the country, and I have a whole presentation about cost of the different types of either equipment or services, average reimbursement, and pros and cons of implementation. So if
Nice.
Interested, at some point we can talk about that.
Okay, we'll schedule it now. Goodness, man. Right.
but here is the across the board pro and across the board challenge for these cash-based systems, right? Mm-hmm. The across the board positive thing is that it is some additional revenue, okay? Right. That you don't have to deal necessarily with an insurance company. It's cash.
Right.
The across the board challenge is that because it is a cash-based system, it requires someone to sell it to the patient. Right. So somehow you, as a private practice owner, you have to train yourself and train your staff, or create some systems within your practice on how to sell all of these products or services that they require cash.
Right.
And I am going to give one more con on this compared to something else. But that doesn't have to do directly with the private practice, but in generally with the profession, that still all this stuff can be viewed directly through the realm of physical therapy. They do not expand the degree of practices of physical therapy. They are viewed as something that is directly within the realm of physical therapy. Okay. So on the other side, things that can be reimbursed by insurance companies above and beyond physical therapy services is implementation in the physical therapy practice of musculoskeletal ultrasound, electromyography testing, and potentially evoked potentials testing. So these are things that the physical therapist can perform to their patients. The physical therapist in the vast majority of states can bill for these services and can get paid for these services from the insurance carriers in the vast majority of states for most insurances. So diagnostics, in other words.
Right.
So what are the positive things and what are the challenges? The positive things for diagnostics is that expand the practice tremendously in terms of the way it's viewed within the community, because now you are able to identify with greater precision your patient's problem and manage that problem in a better capacity.
Right. You know what's actually going on at that point.
What's that?
You know what's actually
going on.
Yeah, you know what's going on. You don't have to rely on a insensitive special test.
Yeah. And then you are able to properly modify your treatment plans based on those results of diagnostic tests and your physical examination. In the study that we published in 2020 in the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies, 465 patients, we found that about 62% of the time, the patient's physical therapy plan of care was modified because of results that were received because of the results of EMG testing. So EMG testing added something in the patient picture that we had to modify the treatment plan in order to the plan to be more effective.
Did
All right.
did that study also include musculoskeletal ultrasound, or was it just
They,
EMG?
there were two studies done. One was a full-fledged study for EMG, and there was a pilot study for MSK ultrasound, which was very similar.
Okay.
And we are working into publishing now that MSK ultrasound study.
Right.
And also, the additional benefit from a financial point of view now is that these tests are reimbursed by 3 to 10 times more than a single physical therapy visit. So you're talking about a significant difference. All right. The challenge is that there is a learning curve. You have to take a few courses to be able to perform these tests and eventually get, if you want, your board certification also, like you have done.
Yeah.
With your ECS.
And that's definitely the challenge that I have seen, of course, personally lived it, is the challenge to learn it for me came from the fact that it had been well over a decade since I'd been in physical therapy school, and now I had to go back into neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, on top of learning the electrical mechanics of the EMG itself. That was all, it was a steep learning curve. Whereas even if you didn't go that far, the MSK ultrasound, much less of a learning curve.
Sure.
And very, if not more, very much, if not more, implementable into the immediate practices of the owners that we're talking to, where ultrasound can give you some of those pictures that you otherwise can't see and can't assess via special tests. And now you can see exactly what's going on in the joints and really give you a better idea of how to progress.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing about the implementation of diagnostics within the physical therapy profession is that it expands the scope of the profession, the scope of practice of the profession. You know, if you want the physical therapist to be a primary care provider for neuromusculoskeletal problems, you better be able as a physical therapist to perform some diagnostic testing to your patients to be able to know exactly what is going on with them.
Yeah, we can't back that up, back up that primary care position without having some form of diagnostics on board. And I know there's always been a push for us to be able to refer or even have X-ray in-house. That's not a huge revenue generator. Hopefully people aren't seeing it as something that's going to be a game changer in terms of our productivity, because from what I can tell, and I'm sure you've done more research on it, the reimbursements for an X-ray are not all that great. The machinery is.
Yeah, usually a shoulder X-ray is $19.
Right.
$16, $19. Yeah. You know, the reimbursement for an MSK ultrasound, even a single unit, is $100, $120. You know,
right. Yeah, and then, but the ability to refer out would also be nice. But if you can, well, as you can see from what physicians are doing, if the more you can keep some of these diagnostic tests in house, the better for your business. But it also, definitely, like you said, it's not just all financial. The reward comes from what's in the best interest of the patients will turn out to be in the best interest of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I want to make a statement after I gave this data in terms of the economic data, what happens with the physical therapy profession, what are some of the projections, at least from the side of the Centers for Medicare Services that I have, and some solutions, is that like everything in life, unless you do something about it, you're not going to have a positive outcome, a positive result, right? The good news is that something can be done about it. We can change the future of this profession. We can change it in a more positive direction, in a position of greater strength, in a position of greater, in a higher positioning within the society with a greater perceived value, but also a greater value, financial value in return for the physical therapist.
Well, I totally agree. Action is required. To have our heads in the sand and expect to pull our heads out then a few years later and expect the world to be different. Well, yeah, it's going to be different because you're going to be well behind the curve. Action is required in order for us to grow, expand, progress. And instead of sitting back and complaining about these poor reimbursement rates, well, what are you doing about them? Are you denying those poor payers and focusing on higher payers? Are you adding services that provide greater value both for the patients and for your business? What are you doing? We talked about a special interest group. Are you joining some of the special interest groups? Are making voice heard, whether at a national level or a state level? Because I know in talking to a couple of owners I know in New York, there is a push in the state of New York alone to be recognized as one of those primary care providers. And that could affect specifically your state. And I'm sure if more and more states did that, then it would be easier than at the national level to be recognized by CMS as primary care providers. So like I said, action is required and not just continuing as we currently are.
And I want to say the actions have to be on two different fronts, because sometimes people take only advocacy actions. Great. We must take advocacy actions. In other words, join the APTA, join the PPS APTA, join the special interest groups, write letters to legislators, go out on the streets and demonstrate, do whatever advocacy activity you want. But the advocacy activity is something in the long term. It will have some results. It will bring some results in a long-term capacity. There are things that you need to do right now. The advocacy action is not going to increase your reimbursement right here, right now.
Right.
So what will do that is by adding in your practice things that can offer greater value, both for your patients and financial value for you.
Right.
Things that are either cash-based or things like diagnostics that are reimbursed by the insurance.
Exactly.
So,
got it. Well, Dimi, you shared a ton of value, and I know you need to get to the opera here in a little bit. So if people wanted to reach out to you directly, how do they do that?
A couple of different ways. One is they can go to our website, handsoncompanies.com. handsoncompanies.com. That's our website. They can find lots of information there. But if anybody wants to meet directly with me for anything, I have a little website scheduler. It's callwithdme.com, and people can just meet with me and ask me any questions they have about
and just so they know, call with Dimi is D as in dog, I, M as in Mary, I. So call with DIMI.com if they want to reach out to you. And I know you're very available and that's very nice of you to do that. And I also want to put a plug in because in September of 2022, there will be a hands-on diagnostics symposium, the annual symposium. Right now, I think it's scheduled in Clearwater, Florida. Clearwater Beach, to be example, get out on the ocean. So for those people who might be interested in how diagnostics could impact their business, definitely want to look into that as well.
And they get 18 CUs also.
Nice.
They have some free dinners and stuff and lots of fun and entertainment. Right. And they can get information on that at HODS, HODS symposium.com, HODSsymposium.com.
Great. Cool. Well, again, thank you for your time, Dimi. I always appreciate it.
Thank you, Nathan. Be well.